Inceptia is committed to innovative, effective, and uncomplicated verification solutions for financial aid offices. Verification Gateway transforms the verification process for students, parents, and staff. Our virtual platform saves you time by increasing completed verifications and packaging rates. This means you can spend less time on the verification process and more time where it counts, with your students. Find out what Verification Gateway can do for you.
Welcome to today's presentation by the California Student Aid Commission. This session will cover the California state programs for foster youth, including the Cal Grant B for foster youth and the Chafee Grant. First in this presentation, we will introduce the newly expanded Cal Grant B with the special exceptions for foster youth. So while the Cal Grant B has been around forever, the existing requirements were expanded in the 2018-2019 school year to provide additional opportunities for college students who were in foster care at any point since age 13. Foster status is automatically verified by the California Department of Social Services, and 3 of the Cal Grant B requirements were expanded specifically for foster youth. First, the priority high school entitlement application window was increased to beyond just high school seniors and prior year graduates to now include verified foster youth through age 26, provided that they also submit a high school GPA. So for a high school entitlement applicant, that application also has to be accompanied by a high school GPA. The second expansion was with the actual application deadline. Non-foster students have to apply by March 2nd, but for foster youth who are attending a California community college, they actually have until September 2nd to apply. And then lastly, and the largest expansion, was that the lifetime eligibility of 4 years was increased to 8 years or 800% for foster youth. And notice also that this again is just looking at students who were in the foster care system from age 13 and up. The foster youth verification tool is a new tool that we developed in partnership with the California Department of Social Services to identify foster students who were in foster care from age 13 and up and therefore may be eligible for campus or federal foster programs. So this tool is going to identify students, again, who are in foster care from age 13 and up and could potentially be eligible for campus or federal foster care programs. Note that this tool is not needed for Cal Grant B for foster youth, and that's because students who are already flagged as foster youth and are awarded the Cal Grant B for foster youth were already verified, and so no further verification is needed. Once again, this tool is for federal and campus aid only, not the Chafee Grant or any other type of programs. And notice that this tool will give you read access only, meaning that when you input your student's data here and click verify, you're not actually submitting any changes. You're just verifying that you'd like to confirm the foster youth status of that particular student. And another thing you'll note is that these students that pop up as verified foster youth in the system may not be Chafee eligible, and that's again because this tool is looking at students who are in the foster care system from age 13 and up, whereas Chafee Grant recipients had to have been in foster care from age 16 to 18 for any one day between ages 16 and 18. So if a student left foster care at age 15, they may be eligible based on this tool for types of federal and campus aid, but not for the Chafee Grant. So some other tips about this particular tool, in order to ensure a successful query, you want to use the demographic information for your student that matches up against the California Department of Social Services records. So if you have this error code that pops up that foster youth cannot be confirmed, it could be because there's some discrepancy in the data that you are providing here as against what the California Department of Social Services records show. And another tip is that you'll need, that student will have had to have claimed your college on and they should be on your roster in order for you to be able to see them here. So another new program with the Commission is the Cal Grant for Students with Dependent Children. And while this award is not specific to foster youth with dependent children can also qualify. So let's take a look at the requirements. So new legislation allows for Cal Grant awarded students with dependent children to receive a new and significantly larger Cal Grant Access Award. So students at public colleges, the California Community Colleges, California State Universities, and University of California campuses with dependent children under 18 years of age and for whom those students are providing more than 50% support can qualify. And the eligibility is initially determined by the question about dependent children on the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application. Once a student is initially flagged based on how they've responded to that question, they will then have to submit a certification confirming that they do indeed have a qualifying child. And so notice that the dollar amounts for the Access Award are significantly larger. So a new Access Award for a qualifying Cal Grant A recipient will now pay up to $6,000, up to $6,008 for Cal Grant B awardees, or up to $4,000 for our eligible Cal Grant C recipients. So one significant change with this program is that there is no automatic community college reserve associated with this particular award. So normally a Cal Grant A awardee at a community college would not be able to access those funds, and instead that award would automatically go on what's called community college reserve until that student transfers to a four-year school. But since this award, including the Cal Grant A, the Access Award portion of that award, is payable at a community college, there is no automatic community college reserve, and students, just like any other student, are going to start using their eligibility when they are receiving funds. And the reason this slide appears in this particular presentation is not that it's specific to our Chafee applicants, but rather that our Chafee students who have a Cal Grant B for foster youth, sorry, not Chafee students, our foster students who have earned the Cal Grant B for foster youth could potentially receive this additional award for that 800% or 8 years of eligibility. So as we move into our next topic, the Cal Grant, or excuse me, the Chafee Grant, notice that the Chafee Grant has some very different requirements than the Cal Grant B for foster youth. So let's take a look. So first, the Chafee Grant is both federally and state funded, and that's part of what makes this different in terms of how the student can use the award and the things that they can spend that award money on. It will pay up to $5,000 annually, depending on that student's unmet need. And the paid participation is limited to 5 years, meaning that any academic year in which a student receives a payment greater than $1 is going to use that 1 year of the 5 years maximum participation. So that means if a student only attends for one term of the academic year, they are utilizing an entire year of eligibility out of that 5-year max. But the participation does not have to occur in consecutive academic years. So if a student, say, wants to preserve the award, they would just need to work with the financial aid office and let them know what their intention is. They can opt out of receiving a payment and then come right back in the following term or the following academic year. They just need to work with their financial aid office. So the other requirement is that students had to have been in the foster care system, and that's out of home foster care placement, for at least 1 day between the ages of 16 and 18. And notice here that kin gap, guardianship, and adoptions are not typically eligible unless that student was also a dependent or ward of the court living in out-of-home foster care placement for at least that 1 day between 16 and 18 years of age. And then lastly, students will age out of the program at 26 years of age. So you'll notice over these next couple slides, there are several aspects about the Chafee Grant that make it very different from other traditional financial aid. So since the Chafee Grant is both federally and state funded, and because it falls under the umbrella of Health and Human Services, these Chafee funds are not earmarked specifically for just tuition and fees or even books and supplies. In fact, Chafee funds can be used towards rent, transportation, childcare, grad school, or even teacher certification. You know, normal or traditional financial aid is usually capped at an undergrad program, but not the Chafee Grant. The other thing that makes it unique is that it's portable, meaning that it can be used at qualifying out-of-state colleges. Now, those colleges out of state do have to meet certain criteria in order to administer the Chafee Grant. For example, they have to have been accredited and a Title IV participating school. They have to have greater than 30% graduation rate and less than 15.5% cohort loan default rate among their federal loan borrowers. Lastly, these additional items, which are not required for most types of financial aid, excuse me, I said that incorrectly. Lastly, this section, which is typically required for other types of financial aid, is not required for the Chafee Grant. So students do not have to apply by that March 2nd deadline. That's a Cal Grant deadline, not a Chafee Grant deadline. They don't have to have a social security number, which is why our DREAM Act applicants are also eligible. They do not have to graduate from high school or have a GED, nor do they have to provide a GPA. They do not have to be clear of default or overpayments, nor do they have to register for selective service. Now, I will mention that these exceptions are just for the Chafee Grant. So naturally, if a student is trying to stack the Chafee Grant on top of a Cal Grant or on top of a Pell Grant or other types of aid, they do naturally need to meet those other deadlines and requirements for other types of aid. Let's take a look at how Web Grants identifies and prioritizes our Chafee eligible awardees. So there are three application requirements, right? The FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, which is submitted every year to initially receive that award and to renew that award, right? The Chafee application, however, is only submitted one time, and the California Department of Social Services foster youth status is typically automatically done through that data share partnership with the Commission and the Department of Social Services. We receive input in a monthly report letting us know of students who have already identified as potentially Chafee eligible students. Now, on occasion, students may not be automatically verified, and so on the next slide, we'll see how to go ahead and get that rectified if that's the case. But most students are going to come here and start this online Chafee application. So if a student is not automatically verified as foster youth, the students can actually retrieve the foster youth verification form on the same website as the online application is found, but on the next tab over, the Chafee Eligibility tab. And here's the form right here, the Chafee Eligibility form. It gives instructions to the students on who to send that form to. And so if a student does not know who their caseworker is or their ILP coordinator, those contacts are listed here as well. Once that form is approved and authorized, it will make its way back to the Commission, and we will then update that student's records with the updated foster youth verification. So students who have fulfilled all of those three application and components, the Chafee Grant application itself, a FAFSA or DREAM Act application, and that foster youth verification, will be prioritized in the Web Grants database based on this following criteria. Right, we're going to pay our renewal students, meaning students who have already previously received a Chafee payment, first. These are typically our elder students, and we want to be sure that they can receive as many payments as possible before they actually age out of the program at age 26. Next in line would be new and non-paid renewal students, meaning students who had applied before but they had not yet received a payment. Those are your non-paid renewal students. And those students are going to be approaching 25 years of age. So naturally, they're also getting close to that age out limit. So we want to pay them next. And so on and so forth down this hierarchy. So notice here that students may be waitlisted. That's pretty common to be waitlisted for that first academic year in which they apply. And what that means is that the student is fully eligible. They met all the criteria, they submitted their applications, and they're just waiting to maybe come from the bottom of this tier and rise through the ranks. And that may take one academic year, but eventually that student will indeed be awarded. They don't lose their place in line. So this next section will introduce our college financial aid techs who may be in attendance today to the eligibility and payment reporting process. So you'll notice that we emphasize the need to report ineligible students as well as eligible students. And this is extremely important because reporting our ineligible students is the very trigger to recycle those funds, which are then used to re-award another eligible student. So in these next few slides, we'll try to explain the recycling process in greater detail. It may help to understand what's happening in the system behind the scenes so that you have a better understanding of how this works. And you may not realize it, but you all really do play a major role in keeping the funds moving and assisting the recycling process simply by working the roster on a weekly basis. So while schools are really great about certifying eligible students, many do not regularly certify our ineligible students. And because the viability of the Chafee Grant program relies on recycled funds, it's essential to keep these funds continually moving by withdrawing and recycling those funds to waitlisted students each and every week. If you do this on a consistent basis every week of every term, you will initiate the recycling process and help our other students get paid. Another important aspect of the recycling and re-awarding process is that it increases award utilization. And that's a good thing because it can impact our future Chafee funds allocations, right? Higher award utilization means that more students benefited from the funding and that more students were served and that this is a successful program, and that can impact future funding allocations. So one final note to reiterate before we leave the slide is to remember to certify and request a payment in the same transaction because only one transaction is allowed per week on the roster. If you don't do this in the same transaction, you'll end up having to wait for another week before you can take any more action on that roster. So the impact of not certifying. So we've already stressed the importance of reporting ineligibility for students for various reasons. Students may not be enrolled or they're attending less than half time. They may have already completed their degree or their program, or they're not making satisfactory academic progress. But once again, reporting the ineligibility is what triggers our system to recycle the funds to other waitlisted students. So as you can see in these examples, not certifying the roster causes delays to eligible students awaiting their payments. And since Chafee funds could also be used towards rent, transportation, or childcare, any delay in receiving the funds can negatively impact your students' ability to pay their tuition and fees or even their rent. In other words, not certifying the roster, even if your student is ineligible, also negatively impacts other eligible waitlisted students. We just want to keep these things in mind so that we're always focusing and following best practices and acting in the best interest of our students. So in this recycling process, it's an example of how the recycling process works. So students are awarded on an annual basis, and then funds are reserved for all terms in that academic year. So at a semester school, since we have fall and spring terms, and quarter schools have a fall, winter, spring, and summer term schedule, students may become ineligible for a single or multiple terms, or they could be ineligible for the entire academic year. In either case, if the students are, say, withdrawn or the funds are withdrawn, they will then be redeposited to the holding account. And on Monday night, when we do the Monday night processing, those same funds will then be recycled to the next students who are waitlisted and are highest on that priority hierarchy. So we recently enhanced the roster to reflect the 5 different award statuses that you can see here. All eligible students are placed on the school roster whether they have been awarded or not. So awarded is pretty clear. It means that the student has a preliminary award offer. And once eligibility has been certified and the payment is requested, a check will be sent. A check will be sent by our state controller's office. Eligible not awarded does cause some confusion. These are the students who are fully eligible, meaning that they've applied, right? They've submitted that Chafee Grant application, a FAFSA or a DREAM Act application, and their foster youth verification or foster youth status was verified. However, that student is waitlisted in that awarding hierarchy. So they will eventually be awarded, and which is why they're called eligible, but not yet awarded. And I stress yet awarded because they will eventually be awarded. Pending means that there's a transaction that was posted by the college or by the commission, and that will process on the following Monday night. So an account or a record on the roster will remain in pending status until the following Monday night. And then paid in full is pretty clear as well. That means that the student was paid for all terms up to their unmet need. And remember again that the maximum award for the Chafee Grant is $5,000 per year. And then lastly, not awarded means that the school actually went in and certified the roster, but certified that student as not eligible for one reason or another. So here's a shot of the screenshot of the roster. And you'll see that the payment roster has 4 quadrants, right? The demographic information screen, which is imported from that student's FAFSA or DREAM Act application. And then the annual level ineligibility section up here, the term level ineligibility section down here, and then the reminders and resources section. So with this enhancement, we included a link to our new quick user guide. It's really helpful, and it outlines almost every payment scenario to help you work these rosters, and it including how to report ineligibility at the term level and annual level. So a good rule of thumb is to work your roster every Tuesday after the Monday night award cycle to certify newly awarded students. So to be eligible for payment, students need to be enrolled in a program of at least 1 year in duration, be attending at least half time, and making satisfactory academic progress. And this is based on the new Senate Bill 150 provisions. So this particular webinar does not go into the SB 150 provisions, but you can definitely reference that on our service announcement. Or you can actually go to the John Burton Advocates for Youth website to get more information about that. But schools may end up having to create 2 satisfactory academic progress policies, right? One for every other student besides a Chafee Grant awardee, and then one specific to Chafee students. And then obviously those students also have to demonstrate sufficient unmet need. Let's go ahead and look at how to certify eligibility on the roster on this next slide. So this is the section where we're going to certify eligibility for your awarded students. Just a note here that there is no need to certify eligibility for students who are not yet awarded, those that have that eligible not awarded status. You can, but you're going to end up doing rework because you're going to have to then come back to that roster and recertify it once that student is actually awarded. So notice that the living arrangements, education level, and EFC, the expected family contribution, are all extracted from that student's financial aid application. But these fields and any field in white can be edited if needed, right? If something has changed, that student self-reported, for example, their grade level incorrectly, just overwrite it. Any of those fields in white can be overridden. Now, a little bit about this terms attending area. These boxes are going to appear pre-populated based on your school's term schedule. So we can see in the screenshot that this is a semester school because fall and spring terms are already checked. And in most cases, you won't need to check or uncheck these boxes. The only time you would check or uncheck is to report a student as ineligible for a particular term and then to bring them back into the program. And we'll explain that in greater detail in a moment. So you would continue to fill in the required fields to complete the certification. Notice also that the cost of attendance can be modified. This is also pre-populated from the annual college cost of attendance form that all schools send to us. So if it's incorrect for that particular student, just overwrite it. And ultimately, for the other aid section, you're going to follow your school's policy on what constitutes other aid because it varies from campus to campus. Some schools will report work-study funds in here or loans in here, and other campuses won't. So just follow your school's policy. So the bottom section of the roster is where the schools are going to request payments, right? In these sections, you would just click the box next to the payment that you're requesting. You can request payments for all open terms for which your student is eligible. And then you'll want to, of course, certify eligibility and request the payment in that same transaction because once again, the roster only accepts one transaction per week. So if you certify eligibility and hit save before you've checked the payment box, you're going to have to wait until the following Tuesday to request a payment. Once you hit save, you need to see the word pending across the screen. If you don't see the pending message, that transaction was not saved. And so you want to ensure that each transaction is saved and does reflect pending. So as you're paying students, you'll notice that some terms will not allow a payment to be requested. Why is that? Well, it would be for one of three possible reasons. You either checked a term box in the terms attending section of the roster, thereby reporting that that student was not eligible for that term. Sorry, I meant to say that you unchecked a term box, and that's the way to report ineligibility. So if you've already done that, when you get down to the payment request screen, that particular term is not going to appear as a payable request. The second reason why you might not be able to check a box and it would appear in gray is that we've not yet opened the roster for that term. And these dates right here in parentheses reflect the date for each term that that roster will open and allow payments. And then the last reason you might see a gray checkbox and not be able to select it is that that term is not applicable to your school. Right? So a semester school with a fall and spring term is not going to be able to request a winter term payment, for example. Okay, so now that we've seen how to report eligibility, let's look at how to report and recycle funds for our ineligible students. So there are more eligible Chafee applicants than there are funds, which is why we need to recycle funds from ineligible students and put those funds back in the hands of our eligible waitlisted kiddos. So we just want to check one reason for ineligibility. This will make the student ineligible for the remainder of the award year unless the school reinstates the award and brings the student back into the program. And we're talking about annual level ineligibility here, right? Just this upper section. If you have a student, say, who did not show up for fall term, and that student is not in attendance at the start of the year, has not made contact with you, it's safe to assume that they may not enroll at all. And so that would be an appropriate use of an annual level ineligibility. But if the student shows up later in the term, that's fine too. You would simply come back to the roster, uncheck the box, hit save, and then over weekend processing, that will put that student back into the pool for award consideration. And typically, if a student was previously awarded, they will most often be re-awarded again the following week. It may take a couple of weeks depending on funding. As we get towards the end of the school year, there may be fewer funds, so the wait may be a little bit longer. but that student will eventually be re-awarded when you remove that checkbox and hit save. So you would want to choose just one of these 4 reasons that you see on the screenshot. And just another remark about SAP. Remember that we're complying with the new relaxed SAP provisions under SB 150. So on the next slide, let's look at how to report term level ineligibility. So unlike reporting annual level ineligibility, when we're reporting term level ineligibility, we don't need to use a reason code. So in this example, we're going to demonstrate how to report a student as ineligible for fall term. Perhaps the student reached out to you to let you know that they're going to take fall term off, but that they'll return again in spring. In that case, we wouldn't want to report annual level ineligibility, right? We're just going to report the ineligibility for that particular term so that the student has a preserved award when they do come back in spring. So to report the student as not attending or on a leave of absence or otherwise ineligible for payment for fall term only, simply remove the check mark from that box and hit save. That's going to then recycle just the funds from that term to another student who is high enough on that awarding hierarchy. But let's say the student regains eligibility later in that same fall term. You would just simply come back to the roster, recheck the box in the terms attending fall box, recalculate the cost of attendance, EFC, and other aid as needed, and then save that transaction. That's going to reinstate the student's award and put them back into the pool with other eligible students. Web Grants will then reprioritize them based on the awarding hierarchy, and once again, in most cases, the student will be re-awarded the following week. So in this next section, we're going to introduce the student application screen. And the reason is because many financial aid administrators only use the payment roster and web grants, but familiarizing yourself with student screens is really helpful, especially if students are knocking on your door or calling on the phone and asking where their Chafee payments are. So this screen has a lot of great information, especially with regard to when payment warrants or checks are issued. So learning how to find this information will make all of you better financial aid technicians. So first, at the very top of the screen, we see the application submission and foster youth confirmation dates, as well as the county that that student was in foster youth or foster care. And notice that this also says that this particular student was a paid renewal student. That refers to the awarding hierarchy. So remember that our paid renewal students who have not reached their 26th birthday by July 1st of the award year have first priority. So next, in this green highlighted area, you can see that the student was preliminarily awarded on July 23rd. And schools have 30 days from the time the student is first awarded in fall term to certify that eligibility. As we saw earlier in the presentation, future terms, there's fall, winter, spring, and summer. All those other terms have fewer days allowed between the award offer and the date that schools are supposed to certify. If those items are not certified, or if the students are not certified within the number of days allocated for that term, the commission will come in and manually recycle those funds once again to keep the funds moving and get those awarded to another student, because the assumption is that if that student's eligibility has not been certified, they likely are not eligible and the school forgot to report that. So finally, in this red highlighted section, we see that our fictitious financial aid officer, let's try that again. Tracy Davis is our fictitious financial aid officer, certified the eligibility for fall term on July 31st, just 7 days after they were initially awarded. So that then triggers our state controller's office to issue and mail a check. And so it looks like this check was actually issued just a couple of weeks later on August 13th. And so that same payment process is repeated each term. Now, there's a lot of confusion around this eligible not awarded status. We saw how it looked on the roster, but this is how it looks on the student's screen. So we can clearly see that there are 3 green check marks showing that the student has met all 3 application requirements. So that's why the student is fully eligible. But they're not yet awarded because they're simply not high enough on that awarding hierarchy to have been awarded at this time. But remember on the last slide, that student status was paid renewal. We saw that at the top of the priority list, but this student status is new. So they're lower in priority. We can also see by the date of birth that the student is pretty young. Where's the date of birth? There it is. And so since we pay our eldest students ahead of our younger students, this student's going to remain waitlisted in queue until they rise towards the top of that hierarchy. They will eventually be awarded as older applicants are paid out each week and throughout the school year. But again, it's not uncommon for a young applicant to be waitlisted maybe for an entire school year. But while they're waiting in queue, they're also rising up through the ranks of that awarding hierarchy. So the final step in the Chafee process is to report Chafee checks that your campus receives, whether they're dispersed to the student or end up being returned back to the commission because the student has lost their eligibility. So the checks that are requested for our Chafee awardees arrive on campus with this stub attached, right? And the stub has all the information about the student and about the term that that's paying the student for. So we want to make sure that before we actually hand the check to the student, or during COVID times, before you mail the check to the student in most cases, we want to make sure that they still are eligible before that check gets dispersed. So you're going to make sure that they are still enrolled at least half time, still maintaining SAP per the new provisions under Senate Bill 150, and that they still have sufficient unmet need. So checks that are being returned for students who lost their eligibility are going to be returned back to the commission along with this stub that indicates the reason for the return. Just one reason is needed, and be sure to do this return that check if you're not going to be dispersing it to your student within 30 days of having received the check. Next, we're going to see that both dispersed and return checks also must be reported on the institution reconciliation screen. And just a quick note for remote learning, distance learning classes during COVID, it is recommended to mail those checks to students via certified mail with tracking and a signature required to ensure that your student is receiving their funds. So this is the institution reconciliation screen. So once again, all checks, whether they're paid to your students or returned, need to be reported on the screen. Many schools aren't using the screen, but it is required and will help you at year-end reconciliation. It's also beneficial in the event a student reports that they never received their check, because you can simply pull the screen back up and confirm when that check was dispersed or returned to the commission. So there are several ways to pull up your students' check information. Any of these options will work. I personally find either the payments by CSAC ID by academic year or payments by SSN by academic year the easiest way to find your students, but whatever works for you is fine. And once you pull that up, you'll see this screen for your students. So it's pretty basic here. If you're dispersing a check, you just indicate the date that the check was dispersed. If, however, the check is being returned, you're going to report the dollar amount that you're returning and the date that you're returning it. That's it. Really super basic. Now, the final step in the Chafee process is to report all the checks. Oh, I already said that. Let's move on. So let's talk about web grants for students, right? Students have some requirements depending on the type of award that they've received, but they also have this student portal called Web Grants for Students to check on any pending requirements. So this is kind of a flow chart to help your students navigate that Web Grants for Students process. So they'll want to check the award status screen, which we'll see in a moment. and the amount for any Cal Grants or Chafee Grants that they may have been awarded. They'll see if there are any pending or incomplete items that need resolution, and they're going to have to confirm the College of Attendance. It may already be accurate, but if not, they can report a school change. And for the Cal Grant, they can also report a leave of absence, and that will put that Cal Grant award on hold. Also for the Cal Grant, students have to verify that the GPA has been received, right? The GPA is not a requirement for Chafee Grant, but many of our Chafee students are getting both a Cal Grant and a Chafee Grant. So this is a way a student can verify that the GPA was also received. And another item for our Cal Grant awardees is that if they are awarded, they have to claim their award. So for a high school student who's gotten their Cal Grant award for the first time, that claiming process requires the student confirm that they did indeed graduate from high school or got a GED, and confirming the College of Attendance. And students can do this on the first day of the month that their senior class at their high school graduates. And for the Chafee Grant, the students can confirm that their foster youth status was indeed verified and complete. Let's take a look. So the status of all types of state aid that the student applied for, whether it's the Cal Grant, the Chafee Grant, and the middle class scholarship, will appear on this portal. This screenshot is of the Chafee application status. So right away we can see that this student's application status is incomplete. Why? Well, if we open up the details, we'll see the reason over here on the right. We can see that the student did not complete a FAFSA or a DREAM Act application, and the foster youth status has not been verified. So it's prompting the student to complete that foster care eligibility certification form, which we saw early in this presentation. So once the student's FAFSA or DREAM Act application is submitted, we'll then see that, and the foster youth status has been verified, we'll see that the requirements are now complete. So they've, they'll have green check marks, and they'll see that all of these items have been completed. And that now makes that student fully eligible. They may be eligible and not yet awarded, but they are eligible. But in this particular record, why is the student's status saying not awarded? Well, once again, we're going to click the reason and show the details, and we can see that they're not awarded because the school reported that they are not enrolled. So this is just helpful for your students so that they can, manage their own awards and understand what's happening with their financial aid. Now let's look at the Cal Grant award status. And this displays pending. Why is that? Well, we can see that the GPA was submitted, so that's good. And they've confirmed the College of Attendance at, where is it here? American River College. So what else is missing? It's that high school graduation verification that's pending, right? When we open up the details, we see this. Remember, we said that high school students who are awarded a Cal Grant, or this wouldn't necessarily be high school students, but seniors in high school the first time that they're applying for the Cal Grant, or students who have left high school but they're still considered a high school entitlement applicant the year following graduation. If they are awarded a Cal Grant, they're required to self-certify and claim that award. So this is where they do that, and that was missing. That's why that student has the to-do item on there. Once they fulfill this requirement, the award will be released from hold, and the college will have notification of that Cal Grant waiting for that student. So let's leave you all with some resources. So how can all of you help? If you are a school or a community advocate or a high school partner working with foster youth, here are some things you can do. If you're a college, right, you're going to work the payment roster on a weekly basis. That's the biggest impact you have. But we also want to make sure everybody's subscribing to our listserv so that you're receiving our announcements. We send out GPA deadline reminders, COVID updates, new program announcements, training opportunities, etc. But things specific to the foster youth as well. There's an opt-in option to receive listserv announcements specific to Chafee and foster students. Teaching our students to be their own financial aid advocates and experts by reminding them to set up that Web Grants for Students portal and to check it periodically, right? If there are any pending requirements, those have to be resolved before a student's award can be realized. And then all of you could potentially participate in or even host a Cash for College workshop. Host sites will earn $300 for attracting 50 applicants to your event. And a Cash for College workshop, for those who've never heard of this or are unaware, is basically an online computer lab. Prior to COVID, these were real in-person workshops that would have several laptops available for students and subject matter experts from colleges, from the Student Aid Commission, and from other advocacy organizations would walk around helping students complete their FAFSA, their DREAM Act application, or their Chafee grants. Now with COVID, we've moved these same workshops to an online format, but it's the same formats, right? Students actually log in, they can go into either a breakout room and talk one-on-one with a subject matter expert. They can screen share, and so we can help students get through the application process. And for a host site considering hosting an event, you can earn $300 for each of those workshops, and you can host up to 3 workshops, potentially earning $900 for your organizations. Not too bad. And then another thing we can do to help our students is remind them to also submit a Chafee application while they're at that workshop anyway, filling out a FAFSA or DREAM Act application. And then this is also a really important item. We want to refer our students to the various campus support services and resources like priority registration, tutoring services, foster youth liaisons on campus, the food pantry, CalFresh. Some schools offer EOPS and Guardian Scholars and Next Up programs as well. So knowing which schools offer these services and how to point students to those services will be of great help to our kiddos. And I mentioned signing up for the listserv, and this is where you would do this, and you can actually find this at the very bottom of the CSAC homepage, csac.ca.gov. And as I mentioned, there are ways to opt in to receive specific Chafee and foster youth announcements. Similarly, we have a way to subscribe to receive AB 540 and DREAM Act alerts. But these are the types of announcements that we send out on a regular basis. So definitely register and check that out. And this is the options I was talking about. So you can opt in or out of different types of alerts, including Chafee Grant and DREAM Act application and AB 540 updates. So with that, we are wrapping up. So I'd be happy to turn this over and not turn this over, but to continue to field questions through the Q&A box, and then just leaving you with our contact information. If you are a school, whether it's a high school or a college, feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all at this contact information. And this is the number and email address to provide for your students.
If you could change one thing to make scholarship administration easier, what would it be? Less paperwork? Easier follow-ups with students? More applicants? We can help you achieve all that and more. We're AwardSpring, and we've designed our online scholarship management solution with 2-year community, junior, and technical colleges like yours in mind. Let's work together to make your life easier. Learn more at awardspring.com.